She stood in front of the crumbling structure, her hands pressed to the rough, unfinished walls. Her in-laws, smiling with that familiar mix of condescension and amusement, handed over the keys. "It's all yours," they said, almost laughing at the thought that this ramshackle, half-built house, a home valued at barely $1,000, could ever be enough for anyone. At that moment, the world seemed tilted, unjust, almost cruel. She didn't know it yet, but the simple act of taking those keys would set in motion a chain of events that would change everything, not just for her, but for everyone who had ever doubted her. Here's what that moment teaches us. A single act of disrespect, when met with strategy and intelligence, can become the spark for transformation. Many would have walked away, accepting the humiliation quietly, but she had a different instinct. She had learned that true power often hides in plain sight, waiting for patience, observation, and courage to unlock it. The house was small, incomplete, and the paint on the walls had long peeled from neglect. Inside, the air smelled of old wood and dust, and the creaking floorboards seemed to echo the laughter of those who underestimated her. And yet, something about that space, the vulnerability, the challenge, the apparent futility, whispered possibility. She paused, letting the weight of it all sink in. No one saw her notice the tiny details. A hidden corner with solid brickwork, a sturdy foundation beneath the cracked flooring, and a view from the back porch that caught the sunset perfectly. Most people only see the exterior, the surface insult. Few notice the potential quietly waiting beneath. A single action flipped the entire outcome, though she couldn't see it yet. That unfinished house was more than just a physical structure. It was a test, a mirror reflecting both the prejudice of others and the resilience within herself. Every screw, every beam, every flaw was an invitation to claim mastery over her circumstances. Her in-laws left her standing there, smirking, certain that she would fail to recognize the house's true potential, and for a moment, she allowed herself to feel the sting of their laughter. She didn't respond, not yet. She simply walked through the front door, touching the surfaces, tracing the lines, feeling the heartbeat of what the house could become. And then, as if the walls themselves were whispering, she understood this wasn't just a house. This was a proving ground. And proving grounds demand patience, intelligence, and courage. She didn't know it yet, but by the time the dust settled, she would transform this humiliation into triumph, teaching a lesson far greater than the in-laws could ever imagine. The question lingered in her mind, sharp and unyielding: could she turn what everyone saw as worthless into something priceless? And that question, quiet, intense, and unrelenting, set the stage for a journey that would challenge not just her skills, but the very beliefs of those who had mocked her. The story had begun, and already the first twist waited quietly behind the door. Before the house, before the laughter, there was a lifetime of subtle dismissals and overt obstacles. She grew up in a neighborhood where doors often closed before anyone could step through them. Her parents had worked tirelessly, 2 jobs each, long nights, early mornings, only to watch opportunities slip past because of who they were, their names, the color of their skin. She had seen firsthand how the world often rewards compliance and punishes audacity. From a young age, she learned to read the room, not just to survive, but to observe. Every slight, every whispered assumption, every polite refusal carried hidden data. She stored these lessons quietly, compiling a map of the social dynamics she would one day navigate. Most people fight what they see, she remembered thinking as a teenager, but real power comes from understanding what they don't see. Her education became her first arsenal. Books were her refuge and her weapon. She devoured biographies of overlooked strategists, innovators, and activists who had turned small advantages into seismic victories. She studied negotiation, behavioral psychology, and architecture, not because she dreamed of wealth, but because she understood the language of systems, structures, and influence. Every lesson added a layer of armor. And yet, even with knowledge and preparation, life continued to test her. She faced dismissals from employers who assumed she lacked competence. She endured relatives who suggested she aim lower, settle for less, be realistic. In-laws who smiled condescendingly at her ambitions, who believed a woman could only succeed within the limits they unconsciously set. That's why the unfinished house wasn't just a gift or a joke. It was a mirror of every obstacle she had ever faced: undervaluation, skepticism, and the subtle cruelty of expectation. She understood, even before she turned the key, that systems of injustice rarely collapse on their own. They persist until someone refuses to comply, until someone turns intelligence and strategy into action. Here's the subtle truth most people miss. Oppression often disguises itself as generosity. The in-laws' laughter, the devalued gift, the subtle smirk, they were all part of a pattern she had studied in 1,000 forms. And she had a strategy forming in her mind, quiet but unyielding. Her past had prepared her for this moment. Every dismissal, every low expectation, every slight humiliation had trained her to see beyond the obvious. She had learned to identify leverage where others saw only liability. She had learned to wait, to calculate, and to recognize potential buried under neglect. She didn't confront her in-laws yet. She didn't need to. Instead, she allowed the memory of every obstacle she had overcome to strengthen her resolve. Each challenge she faced before was now a foundation for the task ahead. The unfinished house, the laughing relatives, the assumed futility. It all became data, all became insight. She paused at the threshold, brushing dust from the counter, and running her fingers along the beams. This is more than a house, she thought. It sits the first board in a structure I will build, not just with nails and wood, but with strategy, patience, and insight. And while the world saw a woman who had been given nothing of value, she quietly began plotting how that very nothing would become everything. She didn't know it yet, but the first seeds of transformation had already been planted, invisible to all but her. The stage was set. The unfairness, the laughter, the underestimation, all of it would become the driving force behind a reversal no one could foresee. And then came the first real test of character, a moral fork in the road, a decision that would determine whether she would shrink beneath expectation or rise above it. The first night in the unfinished house, she sat in the middle of the bare living room, the moonlight streaming through gaps in the half-built walls. Outside, the world seemed quiet, but inside, her mind was loud with possibilities and doubts. She could feel the weight of the in-laws' laughter, the judgment of relatives, the silent skepticism of a society that rarely handed victories to someone like her. Here's what that moment teaches us. Life often presents a fork not in roads, but in spirit. One path demands surrender, conformity, and self-doubt. The other requires courage, calculated risk, and a stubborn refusal to let others define your value. She traced her fingers along the rough wooden beams, imagining what it could become. A home? Yes. But more than that, a symbol, a statement. Yet the easier choice whispered to her, accept the insult. Let it remain unfinished. Don't embarrass yourself trying to prove them wrong. Most people would have followed that whisper. Most people would have let humiliation dictate their boundaries, their ambition, their dreams, but she felt a pulse of quiet defiance. Not loud, not angry, just a measured, strategic awareness that she could take this perceived nothing and make it everything. The moral fork was clear. She could shrink into the shadow of other people, Sit's expectations, or transform the insult into her leverage, the laughter into a roadmap for action. She didn't act immediately. True strategy often begins in observation, not reaction. She walked the perimeter of the house, examining every flaw, every hidden strength. The cracked foundation, solid beneath the surface. The unfinished walls, opportunities to innovate, to design, to assert ownership. The backyard, overgrown and neglected, a canvas for transformation. A single action flipped the entire outcome. She didn't respond to their laughter with anger. She didn't complain. She simply took note, internalized the slight, and allowed it to fuel the fire that had been quietly building inside her for decades. She paused, thinking of every challenge she had overcome, the dismissals at work, the prejudice she had navigated, the quiet victories she had claimed when no one was watching. Each had required patience, cunning, and the courage to step into spaces others believed were forbidden. The house was just another test. But this time the stakes were higher, because the world was watching, and her response would set the tone for everything to come. She didn't know it yet, but this choice to rise rather than shrink was the fulcrum upon which the rest of her story would pivot. One misstep here, one surrender to doubt, and the path forward would close. But one deliberate, intelligent decision could turn the world's perception upside down. Here's the quiet, almost invisible power of this moment. Moral clarity. When she chose to see the house not as an insult but as an opportunity, she began to unlock a form of agency that others had long denied her. This wasn't about proving anyone wrong. It was about claiming mastery over her own life, regardless of who laughed, judged, or doubted her. And so she made her choice, not with fanfare, not with declarations, but in silence, with a calm determination that no laughter could shake. She would rebuild, reclaim, and redefine what this house, and by extension her life, could represent. She didn't know it yet, but that moral fork in the road would lead her to awaken a hidden power within herself, an intelligence and strategy that no one, not even her in-laws, could anticipate. The test had begun, and the quiet intelligence she would summon next was about to shift everything. She didn't announce her plans. She didn't post a single picture of the unfinished house on social media, nor did she explain herself to anyone. The world saw only dust, cracked walls, and what they assumed was her resignation. But beneath the quiet, she was already calculating, observing, and discovering leverage hidden in plain sight. Here's what that moment teaches us. True power is rarely visible at first. It often hides in preparation, patience, and the careful gathering of knowledge that others overlook. The house itself held secrets. While the in-laws had laughed at its decrepit appearance, she immediately noticed structural details they had missed. A brick foundation that had been left exposed showed resilience. Certain beams, though weathered, were perfectly positioned for reinforcement. The backyard sloped subtly, offering an ideal site for expansion or landscaping that would increase value exponentially. She saw not flaws, but opportunities. She began documenting everything. Every measurement, every flaw, every hidden advantage was recorded in notebooks filled with sketches, calculations, and notes. She analyzed costs, materials, and even the neighborhood market trends. By the end of the first week, she had a blueprint, not just for renovation, but for transformation. And then came the human element. She reached out quietly to contacts she had cultivated over the years. Former classmates skilled in construction, mentors with experience in negotiation, and community members with access to resources most people overlooked. Her network, invisible to those around her, became her hidden arsenal. She didn't need the approval of the in-laws, she needed insight, strategy, and execution. Here's the subtle brilliance. She was turning apparent weakness into strategic advantage. The unfinished house wasn't a liability. It was a testing ground for skills she had honed over a lifetime. Architecture, planning, negotiation, and psychological insight were converging in a single focused effort. By the second week, small wins began to appear. A contractor she had spoken to agreed to donate leftover materials. A neighbor offered advice about local building regulations. Every minor victory was invisible to the outside world, but to her, each step was a confirmation that she was in control. She wasn't reacting to the world. She was shaping it. She didn't boast, didn't seek attention, didn't allow impatience to distract her. Every move was calculated, silent, deliberate. A single action flipped the entire outcome. She transformed the perceived worthless house into a project of potential, all while remaining unseen and underestimated. She didn't know it yet, but these small deliberate steps were building momentum. What seemed minor, consultations, sketches, measurements, would accumulate into a force that no one, not even her in-laws, could ignore. And as she paused one evening, looking out at the half-built structure with the sun casting long shadows across the beams, she realized something profound. Intelligence, patience, and quiet strategy could outpace brute force, mockery, or privilege. The world might have underestimated her, but underestimation is often the most powerful leverage of all. The first seeds of transformation had taken root, and yet the system outside, the judgments, the societal biases, the skepticism, was still ready to push back. The real test was approaching, and she would soon face her first public obstacle, a moment that would test not just her skills but her very resolve. Just as she began to see the first glimmers of progress, the world reminded her that transformation is never quiet or easy. One afternoon, a city inspector arrived, clipboard in hand, frowning at the half-finished walls and exposed wiring. "This isn't up to code," he said flatly, "and I'm not sure this project can continue without serious revisions." Her heart sank for only a moment. Here's what that moment teaches us. Systems are designed to maintain the status quo. They resist change, challenge innovation, and punish those who dare to act differently. Then came whispers from the neighborhood. Some questioned her judgment. Others assumed she had overstretched herself financially. Even a few relatives began hinting, delicately at first, then more pointedly, maybe this wasn't the right choice for you. Their doubt felt heavier than any material obstacle. The in-laws, of course, were delighted. They called with thinly veiled glee, suggesting she had bitten off more than she could chew. "We told you," they said. "It wasn't worth your time. Why didn't you just accept it as it was?" Their laughter, though over the phone, echoed in her mind, testing her patience and resolve. Then the breaking point arrived. A small fire started in a corner of the house due to faulty wiring. Nothing life-threatening, but the smoke and smell of burning wood created a scene that neighbors rushed to witness. The story quickly spread. "She's struggling to even keep the house safe." People whispered. Her vulnerability was on display, the public eye eager for her failure. In that moment, most would have crumbled, bowed to the judgment, and retreated. The humiliation was immense. It was not just about the house. It was about identity, credibility, and the perception of competence in a world that had rarely given her grace. And yet, even as she stood in the smoke-filled room, assessing the damage, she remembered a principle she had studied long ago: adversity magnifies strategy. Systems will push back, people will doubt, but clarity of vision turns setbacks into leverage. She didn't react with panic. She didn't argue. She documented the damage meticulously, contacted experts quietly, and began plotting the repairs with even greater precision. Every obstacle, the inspector, the gossip, the fire, was now data, a lesson in resilience, a blueprint for calculated response. Here's the hidden intelligence in public breakdowns. They expose weaknesses not to defeat you but to highlight exactly where your focus should go. She saw each challenge clearly now: regulatory compliance, structural repair, and public perception. Where others saw chaos, she saw opportunity. By the end of that week, the first visible signs of her strategy emerged. The wiring was fixed, the damaged wood replaced, and the foundation assessed by engineers. Neighbors who had doubted her began to notice subtle progress, though most still underestimated its significance. She was climbing quietly, deliberately, while the world assumed she was floundering. She didn't know it yet, but this public breakdown, the humiliation, the near failure, was the catalyst she needed. It would ignite her transformation and lead to a new mindset that would not only rebuild the house but redefine the system that had underestimated her. The real turning point was coming. A mentor, a revelation, or a moment of resolve would soon provide the spark to shift her from silent struggle to strategic execution. It happened quietly. In the middle of the night, she was reviewing her notes, sketches, and repair plans under the dim glow of a desk lamp when her phone buzzed. A mentor from her past, a retired architect she had once assisted, reached out. "You sir underestimating yourself," he said calmly. "I seen your notes. I know your plan, but you sir thinking too small. Let me show you how to turn this house into leverage, not just shelter." She didn't realize it yet, but that conversation would become the spark for her transformation. Here's what it teaches us. Sometimes, all it takes is one external insight to unlock a dormant potential. The catalyst isn't always a grand event. It can be a quiet shift in perspective. The mentor guided her to see the house differently, not as a half-built structure, not as an insult from her in-laws, but as a multi-layered opportunity. Structural leverage, hidden strengths in the foundation and walls could support additional floors, increasing both space and value. Community influence, renovating with local contractors and artisans could generate goodwill, alliances, and social proof. Narrative power, documenting the journey, its challenges, setbacks, and triumphs, would shift public perception, turning initial humiliation into a compelling story of intelligence and resilience. A single action flipped the entire outcome. She realized that every setback, the laughter, the broken wiring, the skeptical neighbors, wasn't a sign of failure, it was raw material. Every obstacle could be transformed into credibility, strategy, and leverage. She didn't act recklessly. She took a step back, created a meticulous plan, and assigned milestones. She integrated lessons from behavioral psychology, noting how people respond to visible progress in storytelling. She considered how to highlight small wins publicly without compromising the silent strategy that was still unfolding behind the scenes. By the end of that night, she had a blueprint, not just for renovating the house, but for transforming the entire narrative. She wasn't just fixing a structure, she was building authority, influence, and moral clarity. Here's what most people miss. Turning a crisis into opportunity requires both introspection and external guidance. Alone, she might have improvised. With mentorship and insight, she could innovate. She didn't know it yet, but the quiet combination of experience, strategic observation, and external perspective was her superpower. The transformation spark had been ignited, and with it came clarity. The next phase wouldn't be quiet observation or small wins, it would be strategic execution, a deliberate, calculated climb that would leave no room for underestimation. She paused in the stillness of the night, feeling for the first time a sense of quiet invincibility. The in-laws had handed her an insult, disguised as a gift, but she had found the leverage, the hidden intelligence, and the spark that would turn every laugh into admiration, every doubt into recognition, and every system obstacle into a pathway for transformation. The first steps of the climb had begun, and while the world continued to underestimate her, she was about to execute a plan that no one could ignore. Morning light spilled through the half-built windows, illuminating a space that still smelled of sawdust and potential. She was already at work, quietly, methodically, executing the plan she had crafted with precision. Every movement was intentional, every decision calculated. Here's what that moment teaches us. Transformation is rarely loud. True power often builds in silence, accumulating momentum long before the world notices. She started with the foundation, reinforcing the hidden strengths she had identified weeks earlier. Each beam she strengthened, each floorboard she replaced, was a silent testament to preparation meeting opportunity. While neighbors and relatives assumed she was floundering, she was building something far more enduring than appearances suggested. She enlisted trusted experts, not for public recognition, but for mastery. Electricians, carpenters, and designers worked quietly under her guidance, their skills amplified by her strategic direction. Every small victory, a repaired wall, a properly insulated room, a level floor was documented, not for applause but as data. Each improvement added to the momentum of a transformation that no one yet perceived. Even the financial constraints became tools, rather than obstacles. She negotiated donations of leftover materials, leveraged local artisans' goodwill, and meticulously tracked expenditures. Every penny saved became fuel for the next step. Her strategy was not just physical, it was psychological. By demonstrating quiet competence and integrity, she began to shift the perceptions of those around her without a single word of bragging. Here's a subtle truth. Progress in silence cultivates anticipation. The world underestimates what it cannot see. Each day the house improved, but the public remained unaware of the extent of her strategy. She had learned long ago that delayed payoff builds suspense, influence, and power. By the end of the first month, the house had changed in ways that were still mostly invisible. Walls straightened, the foundation reinforced, and every hidden flaw addressed. Yet, she also began planting the seeds of narrative power. Careful photos of small victories, subtle social interactions that demonstrated her competence, and discreet storytelling that reframed the house, not as a failure, but as a project of strategic ingenuity. A single action flipped the entire outcome. She transformed hidden progress into latent influence. Every neighbor who had doubted her, every relative who had laughed, was now forced to notice that something remarkable was happening, but they didn't yet know the full extent. She didn't celebrate. She didn't pause. Patience was as much a tool as her hammer or blueprint. Each day was a step in a silent climb, a slow but unstoppable accumulation of proof that intelligence, strategy, and perseverance could outperform privilege, mockery, and initial dismissal. And in the quiet moments, when the house was still and the world thought her defeated, she felt the pulse of inevitability. This climb, silent and deliberate, was already setting her up for the public reversal that would leave everyone astonished. The tables were not just being set, they were being redesigned. Every detail planned for maximum impact. She didn't know it yet, but the climax of her journey, the moment of undeniable transformation was approaching. Every measured step, every hidden maneuver, was preparing her for a reversal so complete, so undeniable, that no one would question her intelligence, strategy, or vision again. The silent climb continued, steady, methodical, and unstoppable, and soon the world would have no choice but to witness what they had dismissed. The day of revelation arrived quietly, yet with the weight of inevitability. She invited a small group of neighbors, friends, and even her skeptical in-laws under the guise of showing progress. No one expected much, just a partially renovated house, a project still in motion. Here's what that moment teaches us. The most powerful victories are often revealed, not announced. Suspense, patience, and meticulous preparation amplify impact when the world finally sees results. As the guests approached, they noticed first the foundation solid, reinforced, and flawless. Then the walls, straightened and polished, hiding none of the original imperfections, but transforming them into architectural features. Every beam, every corner, every space whispered of care, intelligence, and vision. Her in-laws stopped laughing. Their smiles faltered as they stepped into a house that had been to them worthless. Each room revealed subtle ingenuity, storage solutions that maximized space, a garden that transformed a neglected yard into a serene oasis, and hidden features they had never expected. Built-ins, secret compartments, and design details that reflected not only skill but foresight. A single action flipped the entire outcome. She invited them to explore freely, letting the house speak for itself. As they wandered, admiration replaced skepticism, and finally silence, a recognition that the woman they had underestimated had not only rebuilt a house, but had rewritten the narrative of capability, intelligence, and resilience. The neighbors were equally astonished. Whispers of "How did she do all this? And I never imagined," filled the air. Every doubt cast their way was now reframed as a testament to her vision and determination. What had been a private strategy became a public lesson in excellence. And then came the final stroke. She shared the journey itself, not with boastfulness, but as a quiet narrative of strategy, patience, and insight. She explained, with calm authority, how each challenge, the laughter, the fire, the inspections, had been a learning moment, a test of resilience, and a step toward mastery. The audience saw not just a house, but a demonstration of strategic brilliance, moral clarity, and intelligence applied in real time. Her in-laws, humbled, could do nothing but witness the outcome of their own underestimation. The laughter that once mocked her had turned to astonishment, even respect. Their moral authority, previously assumed, had been quietly and irrevocably undermined. Here's the subtle power of this moment. Public reversal is not about revenge, it's about transformation. She didn't seek to shame, embarrass, or punish. She simply executed with intelligence, patience, and strategic mastery. The system, the public, and even her detractors were forced to recognize her skill, insight, and moral authority. By the end of the day, the house was no longer an unfinished, laughable gift. It was a monument to vision, patience, and brilliance. A single moment, quietly orchestrated and meticulously prepared, had shifted the balance, and while the world watched in awe, she knew this was only the beginning. The lesson extended beyond bricks and beams. It was about resilience, strategy, and claiming value even when underestimated. She didn't celebrate with fanfare. She didn't need to. Her triumph was quiet, profound, and absolute. and as she stepped back, letting others marvel at what they had missed, she realized that true victory is not in applause, it is in the transformation, both of circumstance and perception. And yet, as the sun set behind the newly restored structure, she understood that her work, her influence was only beginning to ripple outward, affecting not just her life, but the lives of everyone who witnessed what is possible when intelligence meets patience, strategy, and courage. The day after the house was revealed, the neighborhood buzzed in quiet admiration. Conversations that had once mocked her ambition now carried her name with respect. Whispers of doubt had turned into murmurs of recognition. She knew exactly what she was doing, people said. That was more than a renovation. That was strategy in action. Her in-laws, who had once laughed at her, were now faced with their own misjudgments. Their authority, once unquestioned in the family, had been quietly and decisively challenged. Some felt guilt, others embarrassment, but all were confronted with the undeniable truth. Underestimation has consequences, and intelligence applied with patience and strategy cannot be ignored. Here's what that moment teaches us. Redemption is not about punishment, it is about illumination. She did not seek revenge. She did not flaunt her success in cruelty. Instead, she demonstrated mastery through action, showing the world the power of resilience, foresight, and moral clarity. Those who had doubted her were now forced to reckon with their assumptions and biases. But the transformation didn't stop at personal vindication. The house itself became a model, a quiet inspiration for the neighborhood. Others began to approach her for guidance on projects, investments, and strategy. She had turned a gift meant to humiliate into a platform for influence, mentorship, and community uplift. The ripple effect was profound. One woman's patience, intelligence, and courage inspired many others to see potential where the world saw none. Even more importantly, she discovered something deeper about herself. Every trial, every setback, every moment of doubt had refined not just her skills, but her character. She had learned the value of silence, observation, and strategic execution. She had learned that true mastery requires patience, and that triumph is sweeter when it is earned through intelligence and perseverance, rather than brute force or immediate recognition. The in-laws, humbled but not destroyed, eventually approached her differently. No longer with laughter, but with tentative acknowledgement. They saw, perhaps for the first time, the depth of her insight, resilience, and vision. And though they did not fully understand the journey she had taken, they could not deny the transformation. She didn't gloat. She didn't seek approval. She simply continued her work, expanding her vision beyond the house, mentoring others, and applying her intelligence in ways that shaped both her life and the lives of those around her. Here's the hidden truth. The aftermath is where legacy begins. It is where the quiet victories solidify, where the lessons are absorbed, and where transformation extends beyond the individual to influence systems, perceptions, and communities. Her journey was no longer about a single house. It was about demonstrating the power of strategic action in the face of doubt, bias, and societal underestimation. And as the sun set on the newly transformed home, she looked back, not with triumphalism, but with clarity. Every obstacle had been a teacher, every slight a catalyst, and every silent victory a foundation for greater influence. The world had witnessed her brilliance, but she had also gained something far more enduring, a mastery of self, of strategy, and of the subtle systems that shape opportunity. The next and final step awaited: reflection, moral insight, and the call to action that would inspire others to claim their own power. She stood on the porch of the house she had transformed, watching the sun dip below the horizon. What had once been a source of humiliation, a half-finished, undervalued structure, had become a testament to patience, intelligence, and quiet strategy. Every beam, every corner, every polished surface carried the story of resilience and foresight. Here's what that moment teaches us. True legacy isn't about recognition or applause, it's about the ripple effect of deliberate, thoughtful action. She didn't just renovate a house, she reshaped perceptions, challenged assumptions, and created a blueprint for anyone underestimated by the world. Her in-laws, humbled by their misjudgment, had learned a lesson in respect, but more importantly, she had learned an even greater lesson: the value of strategic patience, the power of unseen intelligence, and the moral weight of perseverance. She had turned insult into opportunity, skepticism into admiration, and adversity into mastery. The house became more than a home. It became a symbol for the young woman who refuses to be defined by others' low expectations, a symbol for communities that often feel overlooked, undervalued, or underestimated, and a symbol for anyone who has faced systemic obstacles, yet refused to surrender their ambition, their dignity, or their vision. She reflected on the journey, the laughter, the fire, the inspections, the quiet planning, the small wins, all were necessary steps that led to a transformation bigger than bricks and mortar. And here's the key insight. Moments of adversity are not setbacks, they are invitations to reveal hidden strength, intelligence, and resolve. And so she turns to the audience, calm but firm, a mentor speaking through narrative. Observe your obstacles. Every challenge carries information. Act with strategy. Patience and planning amplify intelligence. Transform doubt into leverage. Underestimation is a hidden advantage. Build silently, execute deliberately, and let results speak louder than words. Your own unfinished house, whatever form it takes, may feel like a limitation today, but remember, within every undervalued, overlooked, or dismissed moment lies the seed of transformation. The world may laugh, doubt, or underestimate, but intelligence, strategy, and perseverance are quietly unstoppable forces. She took a deep breath, feeling the weight and power of her journey. The house was complete, but her influence had only begun, and now, it was your turn to act. Like, comment, and subscribe if this story resonated with your values. Share your own moments of underestimated brilliance, and remember, the world may not see your potential yet, but that doesn't mean it isn't there. Transform, execute, and rise. The sun set, but the legacy endured. The house stood as proof that the underestimated can redefine reality, and the next story, the next transformation, begins the moment you choose to rise.